Hello and welcome to another screencast. This time we'll be discussing the skeletal system, introduction to the skeletal system here, and by the end of this, hopefully you'll be able to identify the two divisions of the skeletal system and some of the bones in those two divisions, the 5 functions of the skeleton, 2 basic types of bones, and 4 shapes of bones. So let's get started. Here is the skeleton, and we have an anterior view, of course, here, and then a posterior view. There are 2 subdivisions of the skeleton. The first is the axial, and the axial is along this long axis of the body. So everything here that's shaded in green. So that's the skull, the vertebrae, the ribs that are coming off those vertebrae, and then this the sacrum here, and this rib cage, and the vertebrae, and the skull. So this is the axial skeleton here. And so again, this long axis of the body right there. So that's the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton then is everything that's attached to that axial skeleton. So the basically the arms and the legs. Right? Now the one odd part here is that actually the shoulder blade and your shoulder blade or your scapula here and the clavicle, right, or your collarbone are technically part of that appendicular skeleton, an appendage. It's stuck onto it. In fact, the only place that your arm is attached to the axial skeleton bone to bone is right here, right, anteriorly. The scapula posteriorly is not actually attached to the ribs there, and you can take a close look at the skeletons in class to see that. Likewise, the pelvic bones here, the bones of the pelvis are considered part of the appendicular skeleton, the lower appendicular skeleton. So the hip bones, right, and then the leg bones are the lower appendage, right? So all the bones of the leg there. You should be able to identify that there's a basic pattern here, right? You have a couple of bones here that are kind of irregularly shaped, and then you have one long bone, 2 long bones, many short bones, and then a series of long bones here. And that pattern is repeated down here on the lower appendage as well. You have a series of irregularly shaped bones here, and actually there are 3 bones of the pelvis altogether. Then you have 1 long bone, 2 long bones, many short bones, and then this series of longer bones here in the foot. So that's axial and appendicular skeleton. It might be a good time now to pause and just review that. The skeleton has many functions. There are 5 main functions that we'll sort of address here. So function number 1, obviously, is support. Right? And so we have this internal skeleton. It's going to be supporting the body and all the muscles that are attached to it. Speaking of muscles, the second function here is movement. The second function would be movement. The skeleton provides an anchor point as well as a movable point for skeletal muscles to move the body. Right? Anchor point and then a movable point. Right? This anchor point is referred to as the origin, and the movable point is referred to as the insertion, and we'll get into more details of that later. A third important function here is protection, right? And this is most represented here by, of course, the skull. The skull here, the bones of the cranium protect the brain. The sternum and the rib cage are protecting the heart and the lungs, of course. Right? So we have protection. A fourth function is storage. And one thing that is stored in bones is the mineral calcium. And we'll talk later in screencasts about the regulation of calcium. Another thing that's stored in bones is fat, primarily in yellow marrow. So this is a site of fat storage, not much, but there is some there. And then a fifth function of bone, or the skeletal system, is blood production. And we had addressed this in earlier screencasts when we're talking about blood. And again, that blood production is more technically known as hematopoiesis. And this primarily takes place in that cancellous bone or spongy bone, cancellous bone or spongy bone. Okay, so 5 main functions there of the skeletal system. It might be a good idea to pause and review those. Bones are classified according to their shape. So in general, we have long bones, which is kind of self-explanatory. Right? The long axis here is longer than the short axis. Short bones, then, the long axis and the short axis are about the same. So these are roughly cuboidal in shape. Right? An example is, again, are your carpals in your wrist. We have flat bones, and those are relatively self-explanatory. They're flat. Bones of the cranium, the sternum, the ribs are flat bones, as well as the bones of the pelvis there. And then these irregularly shaped bones, and vertebrae are a good example of an irregular bone. Okay. Bones are classified according to their appearance. So I mentioned just a short time ago about this cancellous bone of the spongy bone. And looking at this section through the hip, this would be the pelvis. This is the head of the femur right here. And then this is the neck of the femur in this area. You can see that when we section the bone, a frontal or coronal section here, all of this is what is known as the spongy or the cancellous bone. And so you have these little spaces here. And you can see here in the pelvis, in the section through the pelvis as well, this is cancellous bone or spongy bone. And what would be in there would be red marrow. And again, these are the sites of hematopoiesis as discussed in the blood unit. Then the other type of bone appearance-wise is compact bone. And you can see the compact bone here, right? And it's really thickened right here. This is all compact bone. And then you have compact bone around the edge here as well. So this is all compact bone all the way around the edge of this. The head of that femur there, and then the neck, this is all compact bone as well. Here's a better section of it down here. You can see that this is compact bone. No spaces in there. Very tightly, highly mineralized structure right there. So that is the two different types of bone based on their appearance versus based on their shape. Okay. So you should now be able to identify the two divisions of the skeletal system, talk briefly about them, describe them, tell me about them a little bit, the 5 functions of the skeleton, the 2 basic types of bones, as well as the 4 shapes of bones. Okay. Thanks for listening.